are games so unique and so interesting that they simply just sell themselves. And Teardown is one of those games. What's interesting about this game specifically is that with an almost $0 marketing budget, this game blew up, making $57 million in Steam sales and even more off the console edition of the game. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Teardown is an unhinged game where you're the owner of a financially stricken demolition company, and your mission is to do whatever it takes to make money. And Teardown, I think, is a perfect example of what an indie game should be. So, how did the developer pull this all off? Who is the secret man behind this project, and how was a game as technically complex as this programmed by just one person? This is Dennis Gustafsson, and his story starts over 2 decades ago. In 2001, he started a physics middleware company, which provided software that helped early games with stuff like collision detection, ragdolls, and objects that players could move around.
We ended up forming a company around that and tried to sell that as a middleware. We were young. I don't think we were that successful in doing so, but we managed to get acquired by this hardware company, Aegea.
Then a decade later, in 2010, he co-founded a mobile game studio where they made a destruction game that you might even remember, called Smash Hit, which actually turned out to be a smash hit, breaking over 100 million downloads. The studio would continue to make a number of other games before shutting down in 2017, and this is where Gustafsson did a full 180 and went back to making physics-based destruction games.
Now, since I come from a physics background, that's a very natural place to start. And I also think physics make for a lot of fun in games.
So he dreamt bigger. What if instead of balls you had hammers and heavy machinery, and instead of glass you were a maniac tearing down buildings? But this is where Gustafsson ran into his first problem, which is that graphics in most games are made out of triangles, and if he implemented destruction with triangles, it most likely would have resulted in some really weird geometry and pretty tough collision detection. But he had an idea. Around this time, a free software called Magica Voxel was taking off, which let users make 3D art out of cubes. And these cubes are exactly what Gustafsson needed to 1. Make nice, clean bricks, and 2. Make a game that would actually run reasonably well. So he started work on his own game engine in the C++ programming language, developing his own unique rendering and physics system.
Rendering in Teardown is very different from most other games in that it's traversing volumetric space rather than outputting or rendering 2D triangles.
And by August 2018, he had begun sharing clips of his game on Twitter, which started to get decent traction. He continued work on the game over the course of the year, adding the first vehicles, the wood plank system, experimenting with enemies, and even adding fluid simulation mechanics for smoke from his Sprinkle series of games. But this is where the game had a huge problem. See, Gustafsson and Bengtsson had decided early on not to add enemies to the final game.
Enemies, we could have added that, but that was an early decision to not do that, partly because I'm not that keen on violence in games. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's sloppy to put it in there just to get a challenge. It's much more interesting when you have other challenges.
Instead, their goal was to make the game revolve around getting from point A to B. But the issue was that if you're able to destroy everything in your way and destroy every wall, then there really wasn't any challenge at all. In other words, they had no game.
A lot of that didn't work, and trying to come up with these artificial restrictions. So we just tried like limiting resources is a very natural thing, and we didn't agree on that. I remember Emil was much more on the side, like we should introduce resource limitations and make it more puzzly, and like if I have one explosive, we can put it here. And where I was much more of this sandboxy, giving the player a lot of tools to have fun with and still trying to come up with a gameplay that suits that. I think we spent maybe half a year doing this, trying different concepts, and we didn't find anything. So we eventually split up and just like, just gave up basically. But then I picked it up on my own after that, and I spent another 6 months doing more prototypes, and then I went back to this heist concept.
The heist idea was genius. It allowed the player to have the freedom of a sandbox mode in the planning stage, but it created a challenge from the time restriction when you set off the alarms. The game now actually required strategy. You had to manage and plan how to best use the tools and vehicles you had at your disposal to complete the missions on time. By the end of 2019, the game was starting to get even more attention from magazines and YouTubers.
I got to play Teardown. The version I played has a tutorial and 2 full maps.
Hey, real quick, so this video is sponsored by you guys. My name's Alex, I've been making video games for 8 years, here are my qualifications, and if you're interested at all in learning to make video games, check out the first link in the description. Basically, it's a bunch of courses all in one package, similar to Udemy, except I hold your hand, I give you one-on-one help through calls and messages if you get stuck, and there's like a community component where you can meet and chat with other people on the same journey. So pretty cool. First link in the description. Back to the video you came here to watch. And in October 2020, the game was released in early access on Steam. Mod support was shortly added, and most people were obsessed.
Teardown is a game where you do this. And this. And also this.
There is so much excitement in spending ages setting up the perfect mission.
That said, as it stands, Teardown isn't a bad way at all to tease your brain for a little while.
The game was a complete hit, selling 1.1 million copies in just its first 2 years. What I find most interesting though is that this game pretty much sold itself with very little marketing. It seems like nowadays indie devs are obsessed with marketing, some going as far as to say that advertising the game is more important than making the game itself. But I feel like Teardown is a very clear example of how proper ideation and making something visually interesting are what sets a breakout success apart from a mediocre game.
For me, at least, I never spent, I don't know, I wouldn't say any time, but almost no time at all thinking about marketing, and try to come up instead with something that looks unique, that you can make fun videos of, or like that, something that appeals. And there's no question marketing works, but I think marketing works if you have a big budget. And I think people overestimate the impact of these tiny marketing you can do as an indie dev. I think that time and effort is better spent making a better game and hoping that people will like it enough to share it with other people, to want to spread the word and to actually like it.
I think what we can take away from Teardown is that indie developers have one very big advantage over big game studios, which is that we can take risks that those big studios aren't willing to take. We can make something completely unique and new for players rather than sticking to existing formulas. On the 1st of July 2022, the game was sold to Saber Interactive. From my understanding, Gustafsson continues to work on the project. The game was soon ported to Xbox and PlayStation, and multiple DLCs were then released. And as of now, the Steam sales alone are estimated to be over $57 million. Absolutely incredible. Thanks very much for watching, and subscribe if you want to see more of these videos.